Jetzt haben wir uns doch glatt draußen ein bisschen verquatscht.
So we've lost track of time out there.
Wir würden sehr gerne weitermachen.
We'd now love to continue because our next speaker is already standing next to me, and I've again invited somebody to announce him, and we'll hand the microphone to her.
Hallo, ich heiße Josie.
Hello, my name is Josie,
Kommt der Vortrag von
and
Tim.
next is the presentation by Tim.
Thank you, Josie. During the break, I had this little conflict going on in my head. I am a little jet-lagged. I've already missed my afternoon nap. So should I just kind of leave and skip the presentation, just have a nap instead? You know, it might be a really great option. But then I worried that Claudia would never invite me back again. So that's the only reason I'm sticking around to, no. This is, again, David spoke for all of us of how pleased we are to be here with you and to see so many people, from different professional backgrounds showing an interest in CHARGE syndrome, because it is a unique condition and complicated. And we were just talking in the break here about each one of us as speakers has an understanding of a piece of it, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. And taking the time, which we do from in our discussions, to bring it all together and pull it together so it all makes sense is such a dream. Though I think an impossibility as well, in the sense that there's so many complexities associated with the syndrome. I am going to try to see if I can talk as fast as I can, because the interpreters really appreciate that. And, yeah, the thumbs up back there in the booth. I told them as I've aged, I've slowed down, but I'm not sure it's true. It may have been a lie. So, making sense out of behavior. Everybody behaves, right? Each one of you right now is behaving, and there's some very strange stuff going on out there, I have to tell you. So when we talk about behavior in a professional sense, we're talking about stuff that to us is weird and different and unusual, not the typical kind of behavior that we all engage in because we know how to be appropriate. That's a picture which you can't see very well because it's so bright in here, but my son is lying on his side there, and you all know now why he's lying on his side, right? Jacob's behaviors have never been particularly challenging to Nancy and I, because, I don't know, sometimes I think it's because it's the first time in history that having parents who are both psychologists was a good thing. But we have been able to think about any kind of unusual thing going on with him and put it in a certain kind of context, and maybe come up with some interventions that may have helped. It's hard to know, but his behaviors, and also maybe our own interpretation. So if you saw Jacob, you might think, whoa, look at all those behaviors, and we don't see them because we just see Jacob. But I was asked to be on a panel in 1996. No, 1994. No, I'm sorry, it was 96 in Australia about behavior. And the parents were talking about the behaviors that their kids were engaging in, and my jaw dropped. I could not believe what I was hearing. I mean, this was really horrible stuff. And I thought a lot about that, and I think at the next U.S. CHARGE conference, which was 97 in Boston, there had been some presentations about behavior, and people were talking about behavior. I remember walking down the corridor and thinking, we really need a psychologist to look at this behavior in CHARGE. Then I thought, wait a minute, Tim, you're a psychologist. Why don't you look at it? And I raced home to write the first article on behavior in CHARGE and never looked back. I always started out presentations in those days by saying, I don't understand the behavior in charge, but this is my current thinking. Today, I think I do kind of understand it. It's definitely my current thinking. But understanding it is different than knowing what to do about it. And that's the problem, because people come to hear me speak because I'm going to tell them what to do about the behavior. And I think I fall short. Though you see, and we should have time for questions, so you can all raise your hand and talk about the kid that you're working with who's got this horrible behavior, and I can tell you I have no idea. Or maybe I'll have some ideas, or I can ask the panel of people sitting here in the front row and say, Nancy, what do you think? I mean, she's a lot smarter than I am, and so she might have a really important insight that she could offer to it. All right, here we go. So David referred to most of my presentation. David's already given, by the way, so. And for those of you here 2 years ago, I had 2 computers up here, and I kept forgetting to advance. So now I've got to print it out, and I may forget to read it. I don't know. But, yeah, this first one. That's weird. Must be autistic. So Jacob's been playing with finger paints, right? But he's not painting paper. He's painting himself. Now, there are a couple different ways of understanding why he might be doing that. One is Jacob has learned how to do a croak. And I can't do the croak. I've tried, but I can't make it happen. Can you make it happen? Not really. No, not really, she says. But it's a really great croak. And usually when he's croaking, he's pretty good mood, except when he isn't. But most of the time, he's in a pretty good mood. We also remember taking him to a park, and he's got a nice one of these adaptive tricycles that he can ride, and he really enjoys that. But I noticed he was going, maybe there's some flies in the area. I think he's morphing into a frog. One hypothesis. Yeah, he's green. But the other hypothesis is that somehow this is fun for him, right? I mean, when I did finger paints, this has been 1 or 2 years since I finger painted, but I never painted myself. But we can look at this behavior and say, this is really weird. This kid must have some kind of condition like autism, because people who are autistic are weird and strange and do stuff that we don't do. So he might be autistic. And in fact, I was here at the German conference, probably 4 times ago, that a father said to me, after the conference, we're going to have our son, tested for autism. And I said, oh, he'll pass. And he said, yeah, I know he'll pass. And I also know he doesn't have autism, but get the diagnosis, and that'll open up some doors for us. And that's true in the States as well. And it just makes me really sad because we're lying to get money. And then so many people believe that this truly is autism. There's this presumption. Look at my right page here. Yeah. That if someone with disabilities is showing a particular behavior, it must be part of a diagnosis. You know, because that's the only way many medical people, and not every medical person, because Kim's wonderful and she can do things differently, but for a lot of people, the only way to handle something is to provide a diagnosis to it. And that the behavior has little or no meaning, so we don't have to worry about why the person's doing it. We just want to get rid of it, right? And that the behavior is out of the child's control. They can't help it. It's a compulsion. There's nothing that they can do about it. I'm not sure I agree with any of those. It can seem like it. It can become, some behaviors can be so such habits that it's difficult for the child to get rid of it. I used to have a wiggle on my nose, where I wiggled my nose. I will not demonstrate, because for the past, well, at least 60 years, I've been afraid that if I wiggle my nose again, the habit will come back, and I won't be able to control it. But the important thing is, my mother used to say to me every time I did it, "Stop rabbiting." It's like a rabbit wiggling their nose. "Stop rabbiting." I get really mad at her because, of course, I was a young kid and she was my mother. But it worked, right? I got it under behavioral control and I was able to stop it. You know, most of these behaviors can be stopped, but with great difficulty. And why? You know, listening attentively to David's presentation, you know, I'm not sure what purpose wiggling my nose did for me, what purpose there was, but we adopt behaviors because they serve a purpose. And until we know what that purpose is, I think there's a real problem getting rid of the behavior. So we end up with this, diagnoses piled on. Now imagine if you're not a parent of somebody with CHARGE, the experience that the parent has. This is a very difficult diagnosis to receive. Really, really difficult. I mean, today, since every other kid has autism, everybody's fine with that because, you know, we can all link together. But CHARGE syndrome, whoever heard of it? Who can even explain it? Who can even tell you what the CHARGE means or meant or whatever? And it's so complicated. And then, after having coped with that, someone else comes and says, "By the way, your child also has autism." Oh my gosh, now I've got something else to deal with. And then the next professional says, "Well, I see a lot of attention problems with your kid. You know, rather than sitting nicely and paying attention, they're leaning over on the side," right? And they want to hang upside down. What is, you know, I think they have attention problems. They're probably ADHD. We'll give you some medication for that. I'm faced with German here, which I used to take, but I lost it. That's not what I want either. This got printed really weirdly. Oh, there it is. Oh yeah, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Now, it's true, kids with CHARGE engage in a lot of obsessions and compulsions. Is it OCD, or are any of these obsessions? I remember there was a girl, unfortunately she passed away in her 20s, but she was obsessed by boy bands. And she would come home from school and spend hours on her computer looking and listening to boy bands. What a horrible thing. It's a hobby, right? I mean, for us, it'd be a hobby. You know, I enjoy genealogy and family history. My wife enjoys pottery. We spend a lot of time doing our things. Uh-oh. You know, we better give you a drug to get rid of that one. I'm not saying that they don't have anxiety, and in fact, I will say they have anxiety. But do we have to add OCD onto the diagnosis? Do we have to add Tourette syndrome, you know, which is kind of a combination of an oral tic and a motor tic? So you're going like this, I'm going all the time. You know, probably have Tourette's. And our kids have lots of tics. But so do many people here in the room. I mean, tics are very common. I knew a psychiatrist who was writing a book on involuntary motor movements kind of thing. I forget what he called it, but I asked him one time, what's the difference between a stereotypy, a tic? I went through a list of different kinds of movement things, and he said, it's a mess. It's a mess, you know. They all overlap so much. I think, and I've said this so many times over the years, CHARGE is enough. That's enough of a diagnosis. We don't need to add all these other things on top of it, and I don't think they help very much. Nope. There it is. There it is. part of the problem with the diagnoses is they create a reality that might not exist. So if you take a kid with CHARGE, okay, that's enough of a reality dealing with CHARGE. Then you say, oh, they also have autism. That gives you this whole different kind of image of what's going on, right? Because we know things about autism. And so this whole new reality is suddenly there of all the things we anticipate to be wrong with the child and the kinds of things they're going to probably have to struggle with and behaviors they're going to engage in. But actually, the CHARGE has covered it already. The kid with CHARGE is going to be engaging in those things without the autism because of the characteristics of CHARGE, many of which David talked about, and I can talk about some others. It also lacks explanatory value. I mean, why does my kid act that way? Well, they have autism. Oh, how do you know they have autism? Because they act that way. Right? Where have we gotten to? Now, Nancy and I have another son who's got some autoimmune disorders. He's got celiac, and he's got lupus. These things you can actually diagnose. You can do an endoscopy and look at the gut and see what's going on, and you can do blood work and come up with a pretty accurate, reliable, and valid diagnosis. These behavioral diagnoses, you can't. They're done by checklists, basically. So, do you show that behavior? Check. Do you show that behavior? Check. Do you show that behavior? Check. Okay, now you have autism. There's no blood test for autism. They're working on one, I know, but they don't really have one at this point in time. In fact, last I knew there were 28 candidate genes for autism that might be causing autism. Well, if there are 28 genes that cause autism, is it possible that there are 28 genes that, because of the characteristics of the person who has that gene, are engaging in behaviors which overlap to a certain extent, but are also to a certain extent quite unique? And that's the other issue. They ignore the uniqueness of the behavior. I used to belong to a group called the Society for the Study of Behavioral Phenotypes. I just joined because I love the name. Wow, I'm a member of the Society for the Study of Behavioral. What's a behavioral phenotype? So behavioral phenotype, a phenotype is this is how you kind of come out, what your body looks like and your hair and all the kind of stuff. A behavioral phenotype would be, well, if you have a certain kind of genetic disorder, are there behaviors which are distinctive of that disorder? For example, Prader-Willi syndrome, if you're familiar with other syndromes, Prader-Willi, the kids compulsively eat. You cannot actually stop them from eating and it doesn't have to be food. I mean, they can't find food. They may find other stuff to ingest. That's pretty specific to Prader-Willi syndrome. But they also have autism, of course, because all the syndromes have autism. At the Society for the Study of Behavioral Phenotypes meetings, and I went to a number of them around Europe mostly, there was a psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins University in Maryland in the United States, and James Harris. He was a very distinguished individual and intimidated the heck out of me, but he would stand up at least once during every meeting I attended and say, we have to stop calling these behaviors and these different syndromes autism, because our goal is to find out what's unique about the behaviors of different syndromes, not what they have in common. He was a student of Leo Kanner, who's the person who first identified autism, and he said Leo Kanner would never have called all these people autistic. That doesn't mean that the diagnosis hasn't been refined over the years, but I really appreciate his pointing out that my goal with CHARGE is to figure out what's unique about CHARGE behaviors. And David just spent a bit of time with us showing us many of the behaviors which are extremely unique, the postural kinds of things that the kids are doing. So can we do the same thing with the behaviors? Well, as soon as we start labeling them as autistic or whatever, we've lost that. Because now people aren't looking at what's different about CHARGE behaviors, so I can understand those behaviors better. We're just looking at what now is common with lots of other things. Also, the diagnoses very frequently lead to medication. I'm not opposed to, Kim, I'm not opposed to medication. You guys listen to me. She accused me of this yesterday. Tim, I know you don't like medication. No, I love medication. Some of my best moments have been on medication. But seriously, you know, first of all, one thing that's really important to know is that there's very little research on the use of the psychotropic medications on children. You know, most of it, and it's probably still on men as opposed to women because, yeah. So if you're an adult male, I got meds for you. But if you're a child, we don't know what the effect's going to be. And I've actually seen kids with CHARGE get on a medication that's supposed to like reduce their behaviors, and it just increased their behaviors. You know, you just don't know. You're playing around, and so but if I don't believe there are any psychiatrists in the room. If there are, I apologize. Some of my best friends are psychiatrists, so it's okay. But seriously, you take a parent comes to you and says, "My kid's doing this. We can't stand anymore, boy. If I have to live with this anymore, I'm probably going to just drive him to the hospital and leave him there." I've known parents who tried that. It didn't work for them, but they tried. Well, then the psychiatrist says, "Well, here's some medication. We'll see if that helps." Of course you would. I mean, psychiatrists don't have lots of other options. So they medicate. And then the parent comes back and says, "It's helped a bit, but he's still doing this, 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 and this." And the psychiatrist says, "Well, let's add this additional medication." And by the way, sometimes they'll work for like 6 months, and then they're not working anymore. And the parent comes back and says, "Well, let's add this other medication." I was talking to some people at a CHARGE conference who were working with a girl who was on 12 psychotropic medications at the same time. And I said to them, "She must be a zombie." And they said, "No, we can't control her behavior." Okay, something's really wrong with this picture. But if she has autism and ADHD and OCD and Tourette's, etc., well, she must need all this medication. It's not appropriate practice, but it does happen. You know, sometimes a small dose of a particular medication can really help. And so again, I'm not against medication, but I don't want to do it because the kid has a particular diagnosis. I want to do it because the kid's engaging in a behavior which is interfering with their life. And that's really the key, right? If they're engaged in a behavior which is not interfering with their life, maybe interfering with a parent's life, but the kid's doing fine, I'm not going to medicate them, right? But if it is a behavior which people find difficult to cope with, then I want to give those people medication. Think about that. All right. No, but I do want to. I do want to help them to understand, as David did. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard. Well, we'll get to that. All right. So I maybe belabored that. So I'm not convinced then that the additional diagnoses to cover the behavior is very useful to anybody, let alone the kid. Because it doesn't help us know what to do other than medicate. And it doesn't help us probably to be able to get into the experience of the child to understand what's being communicated. And also, if your behavior is the one way you have to kind of let the world know that something bad is going on with you, and I'll come back to this, and you medicate it away, the child's lost an ability to communicate. And I don't want them to lose that. So another way to think about behavior is that behavior is learned. And of course it is. I mean, I'm not going to stand up here and say it isn't. But this has led to an approach from behaviorism of applied behavior analysis. And applied behavior analysis is simply the implementation of behavioral principles to eliminate some behaviors and replace them with other behaviors. And I don't know how Germany and surrounding countries are with ABA, but it's become very, very popular in the States because insurance will pay for it. And so many people are going into becoming ABA practitioners with a ridiculously little amount of training and maybe not understanding entirely what it is that they're really doing. There was a parent from Nova Scotia a number of years ago. I don't think she knew you, but I can't remember. But she emailed me and said, so my daughter's been diagnosed with autism. And I said, congratulations. And she said, now they have the autism team comes out to my house twice a week to work with her. Okay, how's that going? She's getting worse and worse and worse in her behaviors. I said, I'd recommend that you tell the autism team to not come back because they don't understand that in CHARGE, we have sensory issues. And, you know, as David has pointed out, so many of these behaviors are sensory related, especially, he really highlighted the vestibular functioning, which I think is incredibly important. And we're trying to get them to stop doing these things. I mean, just imagine, just a simple thing. The kid is in the classroom like this, right? Or they're sitting like that. And the teacher says, you know, I try to correct this kid. An appropriate posture in the classroom is upright, eyes forward, you know, paying attention. You don't hold up your head. You don't lie down on the they're so lazy, as David pointed out. Well, now the ABA people come through, okay, we'll change that. We can get them to sit up. You know, and so we will use the magic of applied behavior analysis to essentially get them rid of this behavior of lying on the desk and reinforce them like crazy for sitting up. Okay, they come in and they do that, and are you surprised that the kid's behavior is becoming worse? Because you're trying to get rid of the solution they have come up with to pay attention in class. This is crazy. Now, one of my former students, Lily Slavin, is a practitioner of ABA, among many other things. But we agree 100% when we're talking about it, that you can't just do it willy-nilly. That may be a unique expression. Just can't do it for fun without understanding what it is you're taking away from the child. So I have real problems with approaching the whole behavior in charge thing through the lens of behaviorism, because all it is looking at is what are the problematic behaviors, how do we get rid of them, what to replace them with. So the other option I have up here is behavior is chosen. And this is exactly what David was talking about. I mean, why does the kid lie on the couch with one leg over the other leg? You know, he has several pictures of, yeah, my kid does it. So many of the kids do it. It's not a problem, right? But it must be serving a function for them. I mean, trying to get into their lived experience, we don't really know what the problems are that they're confronting. I mean, David gave us some great hints as to what they're struggling with, what they're dealing with, and why the solution is planking across chairs or any of the other behaviors that he showed us pictures of. And there are many other kinds of behaviors. Why would the kid choose that? And to me, that opens up much more opportunity to understand what's going on when I think of it as something they are. Now I'm not saying they're consciously choosing. They don't have maybe a bunch of 5 different possibilities that they might get into when they choose one. But in having chosen one, they will continue to use that one because it's working. It's working for them. And so for us to say, well, we'll fix that, we'll diagnose it. what good does that do? Well, we'll drug it. That really doesn't help either. Well, we'll get rid of it through ABA, applied behavior analysis. Well, you might be successful, but then when the behaviors get worse or reappear in a different form, you're no farther ahead. So I really think this is so important. Why did the child choose that? It's a picture of a girl from the one French conference I went to, and I guess I'm going back this fall, but it's been a lot of time in between. But she picked her skin on her wrist, and it would bleed. And that's her sister next to her who said to me, I don't know why she does this. And I said, I don't know why either. It's very hard when you get a specific kid. But, you know, in our own thoughts, why would a kid be doing that? You know, that's got to be painful. And then what's the intervention? I remember a parent from Florida, actually. I mentioned the state from Florida. We don't like Florida anymore anyway, so. But this kid was biting his fingers constantly, so they bled. And she said she tried everything, and nothing worked. Well, then clearly hadn't tried everything. And also, she said, and my child has no communication. I told her that wasn't true. Biting the fingers is communication. But she wasn't buying it, so she said, I'm going to pull all his teeth. And she had all his teeth pulled. Okay, there's a solution. You see the danger in not asking why would the child choose to bite his or her fingers? Why would they scratch their fingers? And because we don't know immediately doesn't mean that it can't have meaning. So don't give up, right? It can take some time to figure out what's going on. Where am I here? Okay. So think about the behavior. What's the purpose? And as David talked about, you know, what's the communication? Because all behavior is communication. Although he did a nice job of pointing out, it doesn't mean the kid's deliberately trying to tell us something. But in looking at their behavior, that tells us something. It tells us the kid is choosing something because they have a problem they're trying to solve. I need to figure out what that problem is, and then we've got someplace to go. So ask yourself, you know, what's the function of the behavior? How does it help them? Ask yourself why the child's willing to experience and accept certain consequences. You know, I'm getting sores on my skin, but that's okay because it's still solving a problem for me, whatever that problem might be. Because, and I don't know which one of us said this first, David, but behavior is often the creative solution the child develops to cope with their situation. And I love that. So this is probably David's quote because I love it so much. The creative solution. Our kids are bloody geniuses. They figure stuff out that we never would have come up with. Okay, this picture is actually one that David used to use. And I wanted to use it in a publication, and so I found the family, got their permission. They sent me a better copy of it. So everything's good here. But this kid's, you know, watching television. That's a very strange position to be watching television in. And I really doubt that anybody taught him how to do that. If you want to watch television, why don't you lie upside down along the couch, and that'll really help and work well. And in fact, it does for various reasons. You know, you all are holding your neck up. You know how much work it takes in our muscles and other and vestibular functioning too to keep our head upright? Try hanging upside down. You know, your head is perfectly still. You know, and the muscles aren't overtaxed. It works really well. I'm not saying I do it, but I know I could do it if I needed to. So that's one thing that's working for this kid. He can keep his head steady. All right, no vestibular issues going on here. Also, you know, when I look out at you, because I'm looking at you from my upper visual field, as David pointed out, but with the colobomas, I'm going to have to look at you with my lower visual field in order to see you. If you hang upside down, it's the opposite. You know, now what was your lower visual field is now your upper visual field, and you can look directly across. So that problem is solved. Also, proprioceptively, you know, knowing where your body is and feeling it, feeling your body through your trunk, this kid's body is really being stimulated by lying across the couch and getting all that feedback from the cushions and the ridges. This is brilliant. This is really, really brilliant. And no, wrong. There we go. I actually emailed the Facebook group and said, y'all have a picture of your kid hanging upside down. This is just a selection because I couldn't fit more. I mean, I think I had 100 within a couple of days. This is a very, very common charge behavior. Because again, it works. It works really well. But I consulted with a family in the great state of Iowa. You may know where Iowa is. I lived there for a while, so I know exactly where it is, but lots of people don't. It's in the middle. But that helped him. Because this kid wanted to hang upside down, and even though it was a special education classroom, she was not allowed to hang upside down, right? And so she would try to, and they would stop her. Now, what develops then, of course, if the kid really feels a strong need to hang upside down and you're not allowing it, is a power struggle. Now, how many of you have ever won a power struggle with a child? You don't. There's one way. You can shoot them. I'm not recommending that, but if you really need to win a power struggle, no, this is stupid. Why engage in a power struggle? And the mom said when she would come home from school, she would hang for 10, 20 minutes immediately when she walked in the door because she needed that. It was as a tool that she had to cope with the life that she was leading. And this classroom was also a little bit difficult because she also drooled, and the teachers didn't like the drool, so she had a constant rag that she had to keep around her mouth. And because of her behaviors, which were a direct result of not being able to hang upside down, they kept her separated from the rest of the class with a screen so that she was under control. This all goes back to not understanding that all behavior has a purpose. All behavior is communication. And the child has chosen this behavior because it helps them in some way. It doesn't mean that's the best way that they could have chosen, right? And, you know, one of the things we may creatively do in intervention is to help the kid find something else that works just as well. But that would be for the more extreme behaviors, because actually, my kid wanted to hang upside down, go for it, you know? Doesn't mean I have to. All right, so it's kind of some summary kinds of statements here. It's important to recognize that behavior has meaning. Behavior has meaning. We're going back to one of my first slides, that people assume that because it's someone maybe with severe intellectual disability, that their behavior can have no meaning. That's dangerous. Their behavior has meaning. They're engaging in it for a reason. And once the purpose is understood, the behavior can make sense. That's why they do it. Trying to change behavior without first understanding it can be ineffective and even damaging to the child. Damaging in the sense that you've taken away the thing that's working for them, with leaving them nothing else to do, which may lead to even worse behaviors and leading to more severe punishments and isolation. I mean, I get it. You don't want to be around a kid who's constantly hitting, kicking, knocking things over, creating chaos in a classroom. I don't want to be there. Most of us, some of you are there. No, we need to get a handle on this. That's why we have to step back and think, okay, from this child's life experience, how might they have chosen, why might they have chosen these behaviors that we really, really hate? Remember, one of the people that worked with our son said one time, when I walk into Jacob's house, I walk into Jacob's world. And I have to try to understand our relationship and understand his communication through being in his world, not my world that I walked out from when I went into his house. And if I don't understand exactly what he's communicating, I keep trying different ways. And we may go around a few times until I get it. And then things are good. I love that because it's a matter of developing communication. So that's the next one. Behavior is a form of communication and needs to be read to understand its meaning. Reading communication. That is observing it closely and trying to make sense out of it. And then again, behavior can be the creative means by which a child's able to function. So to do this, we have to learn to observe very, very carefully, which is not easy. I mean, I've watched David do this, and I've learned from watching him observe kids so carefully because he has always seen things that I've missed. So don't feel bad if you think you're missing something there, because I think we do. But that isn't not a reason to stop trying. To see what the child is doing. Because we may miss things. David showed the different things with the fingers, and our son is an expert at using his fingers. I've tried to imitate it, and I can't. It's too complex. Seriously, it's just way too complex. But it's so easy to miss as well. So again, looking very carefully at what the kid's doing, because that gets us some hints as to what the behavior is doing for the child. But you can't understand what behavior is doing if you can't see the behavior. So trying to essentially isolate the behavior and then see it in the context of the child's living. So to understand what it may be communicating, and that takes some guesses. And my next slide will kind of illustrate, how to approach figuring out what the child might be saying. Because, that's my next thing. One way to do this is to imagine what the child is saying. I've told so many parents this who didn't understand what I was saying, because I'll say, can you put into words what your child is doing? What would your child be saying to you if rather than using behavior, they were using words? I get that that's tough, so let me give you this example. So here's Justin, 9-year-old boy with CHARGE, or whatever you want him to have. I give presentations on just deafblind, then he's a 9-year-old with deafblind, and presentations on severe disability, then he's a kid with just severe disability, but he can have CHARGE. But the thing is, when Justin's touched, he often hits. And none of us want to be hit by a child, right? So it's terribly unpleasant. So what is Justin possibly saying to us through his behavior of hitting? Well, I hate surprises, therefore I hit you. You surprised me, I didn't see you coming. And so whammo, I don't like to be surprised like that. I don't like to be touched. There are people, many of them with CHARGE syndrome, who really don't like to be touched, especially light touch. If you're going to touch a kid with CHARGE, just an extra hint here, firm touch works much better than light touch. Then they can actually get the feeling without being driven crazy. I wanted to acknowledge your presence. Probably works, right? Whammo, you're hit. I'm just acknowledging that I see you. I like you very much. Often when someone hits us, we don't think they're saying, I like you very much. But they can, given the particular situation. And sometimes, I came home from school every day when I was in elementary school and hit my sister. She didn't like it. I did. One time she hung up a pillow from a rope and said, hit that instead. It didn't squeal. It wasn't fun. I'd rather hit her. But I liked her very much. See, all right, sorry. Oversharing here. I need more warning before you approach me. This is, okay, my son's vision, that's how much vision he's got, right? Completely gone on the right side, that eye's dead. And, upper visual field left side is gone. If you approach me from this side, I'm not going to see you. And so, we try to go around to the other side to say hi, because then he can actually see you. But if suddenly there was somebody there and you didn't know what was going on because you might go like that reflexively and say, what are you hitting me for? I didn't know you were there. I need more warning. Let me at least see you before you come up and engage with me. I've been touched too much and I can't tolerate it anymore. Our kids get poked and prodded by so many people. Physicians, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and I can't stand this touch anymore, so you're coming at me to touch me, I'm hitting you. I was telling you that I'm ready for work. That seems like an odd one, but it does communicate that I'm ready for something, right? And I actually suppose that you knew that, the next 10 minutes at some point, you were going to start work, but you don't know when. And so you're sitting there waiting, because you're ready to do it. And the teacher walks by and you hit because, come on, I'm ready for work. Why are you ignoring me? Right? Our kids struggle with trying to understand when things are going to happen. And so, I think that one makes sense. I was asking you to come back later. That one probably worked. You probably didn't come back until much later. Okay, but you see what I mean? If we could put the behavior into some kind of a sentence, that gives us a starting place. Maybe you're wrong with what the kid is intending to say to you. But then we'll go to a different one, right? Because we'll try this out and see if it makes sense. Oh yeah, every time, right before we're ready to do a work project, the kid hits. All right, I think we're onto something here, right? This is not easy, but it gets us going. So understanding Justin, how do you know what he was communicating? Well, you look for patterns. Now, how often does he hit? Where does he hit? When does he hit? With whom is he hitting, right? Who does he hit? If you can track those things, you can narrow down what the communication is all about. He never hits Nancy, just hits me. All right, that tells me something. How often do you hear from a parent, I'm sorry that my kid's hitting at school. They never do that at home. And I've worked with schools enough, I'm a school psychologist, to know that, that's what we think, that parents are just, lying, basically, right? Of course he does it at home. He does, but very often they don't, because the kids can discriminate in situations. And the conditions in school are different than the conditions at home. Well, right, the parents are just spoiling them at home. I don't know what they're doing. But kids may hit differently or at different rates in different kinds of environments. And so it's really important to observe when these things are occurring, where and with whom. And then decide how we're going to respond. Right? So Julie hits David all of a sudden, right? Now, She's been wanting to all day, so finally. So now David's got a choice in terms of how to respond. He could hit back. He's been, you know he wants to. Or he could give her a hug. That would be different, wouldn't it? If you've ever had a kid, your own kid in particular, but other people's kids as well, that you so much wished you could hit them, and instead you hugged them, it's amazing what that does. Really, just a little parenting tip here, if you a little added value for my presentation. But doing the unexpected often transforms situation. But for my purposes here, David's response to Julie is communication back. And so you have a communicative relationship between these two. She's hitting, he's responding. What kind of communication do you want? I mean, David has to be the adult in the situation because he didn't hit her. So he has to think, how do I want to respond to that? Because I know however I respond will change the nature of the communication. And if I hit her, how is this going to help us, right? If I send her in the classroom to live behind a barrier where she can drool and avoid hanging upside down, how does that improve the communication? It's all about a relationship between people. And what kind of relationship do you want? There's also, by the way, kind of a proprioceptive vestibular, I'm not sure what it all is. Sometimes when kids with charge are beginning to lose it behaviorally, you can, and I do this with my son, it's you know, I go over there and I wrap my arms tightly around him and even lift him slightly off the floor and hold him for a few seconds, let him back down, the behavior's over. It's amazing, but you know, when you think about all the sensory issues that they have going on, that's helping them to process, you know, their sensory experience, and then relax again. Now, if it doesn't work, or it works for just a few minutes, I know something more serious is going on, and I can then respond appropriately to that. But again, the important thing here is how we respond is communication. And communication builds relationship. Communication builds trust. If I can trust as a child with charge that if I hit you, the world's not going to end. You know, something horrible is not necessarily going to happen to me. There may be consequences. I'm not anti-consequence, okay? Consequences are important. But the communication between us is going to continue and maybe even improve. Again, it's a communication relationship. Behavior is the foundation for building communication. All right, many of you probably had babies. And what do? They cry. They pee and they poo, but they also cry a lot, right? In fact, sometimes they cry because they have pooed in their diaper and they're very uncomfortable. Sometimes they cry because they're hungry. Sometimes they cry because they're tired. I mean, there are many, many reasons why a baby cries. And mothers tend to figure out which cry it is. Oh, no, it's okay. My kid's not hungry. They're just tired, and we'll just have to kind of wait it out until they fall asleep. Or whatever, right? But you know that's that cry, not that cry. The panic cry is very different. So, yeah, that's the foundation of communication. That's when kids, babies, learn that they can trust the world because the world's coming to understand them. And then they can also turn on the particular cry, and when they're 2 years old, they're doing this, right? They put a particular cry on there to try to manipulate you and the parent and giving them what they want. And so, you know, we're figuring this out and we're maintaining that relationship and we're building communication. This is true with every individual with CHARGE syndrome. They are working on building that communication with us if we are open to communication back to them. Because it develops in the context of relationship. Our response is part of the communication event. What does our response communicate to the child? You are unacceptable. You are inappropriate. You need to change. Or, I want to understand. I appreciate you. Let's build something. Think about what you want your response to say, keeping in mind the goal of communication. So, before David responds to Julie, it would be good for him to pause a moment and think, what do I want in our relationship? How can I best communicate what I want before he hits her, right? I think he's going to hit her. I mean, it's David, so it's probably what he's going to do. So think about how you're responding. Anybody here ever experienced stress? Yeah, I never have, but I hear it's a horrible thing. So where does stress come from? Well, lots of things. An unpredictable environment. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, David and Julie were trying to get here by train, and they did after several trains were canceled, and they had to wait for another one and another one and another one. Very unpredictable as to whether the train would even come. Stressful? Yeah, of course it's stressful. Our kids with CHARGE live in really unpredictable environments. It's really hard to know what might happen next. I mean, think of yourself with limited hearing, limited vision, or no hearing, maybe no vision, sitting in a classroom. What's going on? You know, that could in itself be stressful because I don't know what's going to happen next. So unpredictable environment. Communication frustration. I engage in this behavior over and over and over again, but no one's paying any attention. One of Jacob's behaviors is to wrench some object in his neck like this, which most of the time says he has an ear infection. Not always, because his vocabulary is limited, but most of the time. And so if we respond, you know, by trying to look in his ear or take him to the doctor, he knows that that's going to help him in the end. So he's quite happy, not always to have us look in his ear, but he's generally happy to go to the doctors because he knows he will get something that's going to help the pain. And so it makes it more predictable and less communication frustration because it's like, I told you. No one paid any attention to me. It's like the baby crying, and no one pays any attention to the baby crying. Very frustrating and stressful. Lack of sense of control or agency. You know, how many choices do our kids get? Or is everything done for them? And how do they communicate what their preferences might be? You know, when it comes to meals, would you like this or would you like this tonight for dinner? Most of the time with our kids, they just get whatever's coming, right? Maybe with our other kids too. Maybe not the best example in the world. But what I used to do with Jacob is I go in the morning and I'd show him 2 shirts. He'd push one away. He got the other one. So it gives him some agency, some control that I can manage my own environment, reduces the stress to a certain extent, except that, well, pants. Did you know pants should always go on backwards? Even if you try to show Jacob pants frontwards, he will turn them around and put them on backwards. Now, we could have a power struggle about that, or we could say this is a new fashion thing. It might take off, I don't know, but if Jacob wants to go around with pants on backwards, go for it, right? There's one particular shirt that he wants, and if you show him another, go to his drawer, and he will hunt for that shirt. If it's there, it's on. If it's not there, he'll walk into the laundry room and see whether it's in there. If it's not there, he gets very upset, right, because he wants his world a certain way. Now, I think it's a tie-dye shirt. It's pretty ugly, but again, Jacob's his own fashion expert, so should do what he wants. Oh, dysregulated arousal. Have you ever seen a kid with charge go from perfectly calm to hyper-aroused in a matter of a couple of seconds? I mean, parents, we've all seen this. They have a really hard time managing their arousal levels. Sometimes they're over-aroused, sometimes they're under-aroused. Most of you are a little under-aroused right now, which is why in a second we're going to take a stretch break so that you can get your arousal level up. But if you were a kid with charge, you would find ways to do this, probably by getting up, lying on the floor, and spinning around, which is an option if anybody wants to do that. This is really difficult, and it's difficult for us as parents. It's difficult for you as professionals to see a kid who suddenly needs to get up and spin around on the floor. But if it's helping them manage their arousal levels, I remember watching this kid who was out in California, and they had her in a gym. She was early high school, I think. And she was working on a machine, and it was very loud in the gym, and loud music was going on. People were running up and down, goofing off, whatever. And I watched her, and she was doing this, and she was perfectly calm, and then, right, and she completely lost behavioral control, went way over the top. And it took 3 people to march her back to her classroom where she was supposed to write down why she was upset. Yeah, Nancy's behavior tells me, see, she's communication. Wow, I can't believe they would do that. Well, they didn't know. I mean, this is Alexis. You were probably even there. Yeah, yeah. It's very difficult for the kids, and that could have been anticipated. In fact, I think most of her issues could have been anticipated. Yeah. When we were at their house, and I had 2 students, I can't remember, you had Gloria, one of his colleagues, and we were having tea, and then Alexis, this girl, she got up and started clearing the tea dishes. And my undergraduate student, I think, no, she was a graduate student. She started applauding. Yay, Alexis, yay, she's clearing the dishes. And the parents said, why are you doing that? Well, why was she doing that? Because here you're catching a kid who is behaving so appropriately. Let's, over the top, reward that a little bit, huh? You know, show our appreciation of it. And that, of course, happens way too often where we ignore the really great things the kids are doing, but boy, we're hyper-focused on the meltdown. And then interpersonal challenges. I mean, how many friends do any of us have? But a lot of kids with charge don't have a lot of friends. And those that they have, I mean, that's why the German group does a great job of providing opportunities for especially the adolescents to get together and the adults to get together and do things. And you can, if you've seen any of the young adults here, like including those doing the introductions, how happy they are to see each other because now they're with friends. But to other people, they're weird, must be autistic. This is probably, keep it appropriate. But if you would like to stand up and stretch for a moment, why don't we do that? And then I don't have a lot left, so I promise you. All right, that's enough. Sit down and shut up. Used to say that to my students all the time. All right. David mentioned my behavioral triangle: pain, sensory issues, and anxiety. You know, after years of observing charged behavior and thinking about behavior, I kind of said, I think these are the three essential things. Now, one of my doctoral students, former doctoral students, she's graduated, thinks there's a fourth one. I'm ignoring that because this is enough for me, but she may be right. So I'll tell you this story of Jacob's ear. There was a time, it was right around the holidays, it was between Christmas and New Year's, when Jacob stopped sleeping. I mean, he would lie down in bed, and within 10 minutes he was up. And the first few nights, by 3 a.m., he was asleep. But then the next night was later, and then the next night he wasn't sleeping at all. So Nancy took him to the doctor, and the doctor looked him all over, looked in his ears, a little bit of wax. Everything looks fine. But I can prescribe you some medication to help him sleep. And Nancy came home and reported that, and I said, no, something wrong. There's something wrong here. And what happens if we give him medication to help him sleep, right? Then we were losing that form of behavior. We were losing communication. His not sleeping is communication to us. And so we need to know what's going on. Well, Nancy took him back to the doctor, and the doctor looked him over again. Said, oh, that's not wax in his ear. There's some foreign object in his ear. All right, you better call the ear doctor, which we did, of course, between Christmas and New Year's. The doctor he saw was on vacation. The doctor on call said, well, probably next week or sometime I could maybe take a look. So we took him to the emergency room, held him down. They pulled it out. The ear was infected, and it was rubbing against his eardrum. So especially when he lay down, it was causing excruciating pain. She says he went right to sleep when he got home from that. I mean, it wasn't pleasant to have to go through, but boy, it cured the problem, and now we have a kid who's sleeping again, right? If we had just given the medication, how long would it have taken us? Because it probably would have worked. It probably would have knocked him out. How long would it have taken us? Pain is so important here. Catch up here. Well, it can affect brain and neurological development. So pain in infants is really going to hurt their brain and its development, and it's developing rapidly. And so we have to be careful about that. It can affect sleep, as we noticed. It can interfere with exploring the environment and learning. I mean, when you're in pain, how much time do you want to spend exploring your environment and learning stuff, right? I mean, if you are in really horrible pain right now, I would expect you to leave. Don't everybody get up and walk out. But, I would expect somebody, because you're not going to get anything out of it if you're really dealing with so much pain. Can interfere with the development of attachment and trust. No one's paying attention to me. No one cares about me. I'm just going to lie here in pain. And then, once tolerated, our kids tolerate pain extremely well because they experience so much of it that they don't always engage in the kinds of pain behaviors you and I might engage in, because this is just normal life. When you get to be as ancient as David and I are, we have a lot of pain that we experience, but we ignore it most of the time because we can. And I think it's so many of our kids with charge are ignoring it that people don't recognize when it is affecting their behavior, that's pain that's affecting the behavior. But it is, and of course, of all the sources of behavior, pain's the most important one to be taken care of. So we should always look to pain first, never ignore the possibility of pain. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't really trust parents, and I know one who's went to 3 different doctors before they identified the gastrointestinal issues that were going on, and once those were taken care of, then the kid's behavior improved. Okay, David talked about the brain, but I have a picture. No, next time you should have a picture. But his point is so important. The brain just sits there and can has no way to, doesn't know how to respond because it needs sensory input. Without sensory input, it doesn't do anything other than sit in our skull. And so the diminished sensory systems that we have in CHARGE, and I don't have to go through this too much because David's really covered it really well. Sensory processing problems are common in genetic syndromes like CHARGE, but particularly CHARGE, because it's not just normal sensory overload, sensory overload of normal sensory systems. The sensory systems are diminished. And so, lots of people say that autism may be a problem with not being able to control and process sensory, vision, hearing, etc. But they have intact sensory, vision, proprioceptive vestibular systems. Our kids have problems processing because they have diminished. So that's a really significant difference. Sensory processing is associated with anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder. David mentioned that. Even incidental sensory events can cause overload in the child. If you open that door and the breeze comes through, just the breeze on the body could overstimulate a kid. May lead to sensory self-stimulation. So you see a kid self-stimming. Personally, I don't have a problem with that, but it can be a sensory issue going on. They need the extra sensory stimulation. And we need to intervene very carefully to avoid meltdowns, because those are not pretty. Okay, what could our kids possibly have to be anxious about? Now, that's a picture of Jacob. Why is he doing this? You all know the answer to that now. He's doing that because it keeps his head stable. Probably why he had the finger paint to begin with on his face. Of course, he's also used other material besides finger paints. And you work out feces smearing. He doesn't anymore, but he used to, and that was always in the same pattern. What do they have to be anxious about? Well, we like to know what's going on. What are we doing right now? Sitting in a lecture in a hot room. But you know why you're here. You chose to be here. It's your fault if it's uncomfortable, right? But our kids don't always know why they might be sitting in a room and what's going on in that room. What are we going to do next? There's been some hint that we're going to have dinner. But for kids with CHARGE, they may not understand when that might occur and how annoying it is if they say, "When's dinner?" "It'll be soon." A minute later, "When's dinner?" "Soon." "When's dinner?" Soon. And over and over and over again until parents want to scream, but they don't really understand and they don't always trust that this is actually going to happen because they've been disappointed before. And then what do we just do? We don't spend enough time helping kids with CHARGE relive some of their experiences. We got in a plane, and we were on that plane for a long time. Remember when, the flight attendant came by and gave you a drink? But not having that kind of stuff takes away a lot of our basic experience, because when we're not sure what's happening or will happen or did happen, we become anxious. And we can engage in behaviors which express our feelings. When you're anxious, think about the kinds of behaviors you do when you're anxious. I tend to get a little angry as a way of expressing. No, just a little. Come on, they're looking at just a little angry. And we engage in behaviors which help us feel more secure. And sometimes that behavior is to increase a sense of security. So when you think about behavior, is it pain? Is it the sensory systems are over or underloaded? Or is the person anxious? Speaking of planes, so self-regulation was in the middle of that triangle. How can we help kids to learn to self-regulate? It's something most of us do during the first 4, 5, 6 years of life, but not everybody. But self-regulation is basically, well, I defined it in the next slide, so I'll hold off. But flying is, I like getting places. I do like coming here. A bunch of us will be going to Australia next month, or 2 months. I'm happy to get there. But the whole process is very anxiety-producing for me, which my wife knows very well, because like I want to get to the airport early, because that helps me self-regulate. I don't have to spend time in the car thinking, oh my God, here's a red light, right? Or there's an accident up there and the traffic's slowed down. Or, because if that happens, I'll be fine. My wife would prefer to arrive at the airport within minutes of the last moment she could possibly get there. And I want to get on the plane as early as I can, right? She thinks when they call for boarding is the best time to go get a drink or a snack someplace. So we do it differently. It's all part of self-regulation. It's just I'm regulating differently than she's regulating. So it has required some compromises on both our parts. But think about how you regulate around that, and you get some sense of what self-regulation is. Maybe I shouldn't have stapled this. There we go. So self-regulation begins with a goal. There's something I want to achieve, something I want to have happen. So what must I do to make it happen? And our kids are full of goals. There's something they want to have happen. They see an object poorly, but they want that object. Now I have to figure out how am I going to get from here to there to get the object. And David gave you a nice list of some of the unique, clever ways they figured out. You know, our son had the bald patch in the back because he was a back scooter. But by golly, got to places he wanted to go. That's all part of self-regulation, even though it seems like this kid must be autistic because they're weirdly moving around on their back or doing the 5-point crawl. No, this is their creative solution to regulate their life. All right. Self-regulation of pain. We do. I mean, that's when we're talking about old people here. You know, David and I both have some issues with chronic pain, but we've learned to regulate those. And many of you have as well. It's not just in old people, right? But you've got that knee problem that's just so nagging, or, you know, you were silly enough to play some sport, and now, you know, 10 years later, you can't move very well without pain. And this stuff all happens. And we start getting anxious, particularly at night, right? When the pain's worse, because you don't have things to distract you, and you're pretty sure you're going to be dead within 2 days. That's pain catastrophizing. And you get tense and nervous and, you know, irritable, and you know how you act. And stress, of course, is a part of it. So what do we do to self-regulate? Well, we change our thoughts and expectations. Tim, you're not going to be dead tomorrow. And if you are, you'll have no more pain, so it's all good. So change your thoughts, change your expectations. Meditation helps, yeah, and distracting ourselves. You know, and you can add to the list of things that you do to self-regulate pain. This is self-regulation of the sensory systems. You know I need something to help me keep this regulated. So let me do this one because I'm getting nice compression on my head, and you know, my back and my legs are over the swing. This is really cool. So the hanging upside down is a part of regulating your sensory systems. Okay, this is self-regulation of anxiety. And you'll be happy to know we're just about done. Hang in there. All right. Routine. You know, and some of us live by routine. I identify myself in that category. My wife, not so much, which makes life fun and interesting and always fresh, right? But it is. I mean, so some kids learn, this is the way to organize my life, right? And this is what I do when I get up, and this is what I do when I get on the bus, and this is what I do when I get to school, and this is what I do. And some of the behaviors that we're most concerned about are part of their routine. And so recognizing them as part of routine may help us see ways to modify the routine, or to, like again, it was the same girl in California who watched TV in a separate room before her class started in the morning. It's just part of her routine. She got to school early, sat and watched TV. And then if the teacher said, okay, now you got to turn off the TV and come into the room, she could have a meltdown. But if the teacher came in and said, okay, Alexis, we have 5 minutes, then came back and said, we have 3 minutes, then came back in and said, now, she got up and went and did it. But it was part of her routine, but we have to recognize the difficulties sometimes they have in changing from one situation to another. All right, if all this was easy, I'd have nothing to talk about ever again. And some people would be really happy about that, but I'd be sad. There'd be no behavior problems because we'd all have it figured out. You could all go home, go to school, wherever you work, fix all those problems. Patience, persistence, and the courage to be imperfect. I've been watching you all. There's a bunch of imperfect people in this room. But that's okay. Just have the courage to be imperfect and recognize that we're not going to succeed all the time, but you can get closer. When I retired, my wife said, "You want a retirement party?" And I said, "I want a reunion of my research lab." And so we sent out invitations, and I had probably 40 people, undergraduates and graduate students in my lab over the years. 15 were able to come. It was Mother's Day, and that limited a few people. Although one of my undergraduate students said, "I told my husband, this is Mother's Day, and for Mother's Day, I want to go to the lab reunion." I like that a lot. But I've learned so much from my lab over the years, and I don't have one anymore because I'm retired. But these people really helped form my ideas and help promote. And some of them are going on to being leaders in CHARGE syndrome. So that took longer than I anticipated. Thank you for your attention. I really, really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Should we ask for questions?
Well, it's up to you. There's like 11 minutes before. I can.
Go ahead, just ask if there are questions.
Sure.
Gibt es Fragen? Wir haben nicht mehr so viel Zeit.
Do we have any questions? We don't have all that much time, but if anyone had questions, we'd try and take them. Other than that, if there are no questions, Tim will be around all evening, so...
You find a translator.
Ja.
There might be a couple in the back.
Ja, also wenn es jetzt keine Fragen gäbe, dann würde ich sagen, ab 18 Uhr gibt es Abendessen.
So if there are no questions, let me tell you, we have dinner at 6 and we'll meet family Heilmann at 7:30, 7:30. So there don't seem to be any questions.
Dann no.
Okay.
Ja gut, dann
Fine.
sehen wir uns später.
Before dinner.
Ja, it's okay. Dann sehen wir uns später. Lieben Dank.
Okay, see you later, everyone.